Hey everyone, welcome back to the It's a Mind Game podcast. My name is Jade and I am a personal trainer and mindset coach specializing in female specific training. As you know, I have a specialty in HA and ED recovery, but for the most part, I am here to help you achieve your best when it comes to health and fitness as a woman. Now, today's conversation I'm actually quite excited to bring to you because I really want you to have a think about what I'm about to put forward. So I'm not suggesting I'm right, I'm wrong, this is good, this is bad. I just want you to have a listen, have a think, and see where it takes you. Often when we talk about HA or ED recovery, the A-type personality comes up. I'm experiencing this because of my A-type personality, or perhaps I've always been a perfectionist and perhaps that is the cause or some part of the cause of your HA or ED, or perhaps your perfectionism is preventing you from recovering because you feel like you don't know what the perfect process is. And without that perfect process, it seems untrustworthy. Now, what I would like you to think about is, what if we were to swap perfectionism and see it for procrastination? Okay, now again, this is a fuel for thought conversation, all right? So please just keep your awareness open and don't give up on me. Now, what I mean by that is it's so common that women will come to me, and I was even the same myself with my HA recovery, which was unless I had the perfect plan, it felt like it wasn't good enough and not worth pursuing. Unless I knew exactly what workout would get me to recover my period, unless I knew exactly what nutrition would get me to recover my period, it didn't feel worth it and it felt too scary or as though the odds were against me. Now, when I look back on that, my so-called perfectionism was actually just this weird, well, not weird, creative way for me to hide my procrastination, which was, I'm just too scared to do this, or perhaps there's two unknowns and I feel uncertain. But the reality is, when we look at HA recovery and ED recovery, any step forward is a positive step. And seeking out something perfect is our perfect way to stand still, right? But often it's brought forward that this perfectionism is just a part of us, it's just our personality. So that's why I'm really interested in you flipping this perfectionism on its head and looking at it as procrastination. Because for the most part, women who see themselves as perfectionists or A-type personalities, procrastination is something we do not do, right? We have a task and we want to get to it straight away and we want to get the job done. So seeing different things in a light of procrastination instead of perfectionism could actually be really motivating or inspiring to you. And that's why with this chat, I really want you to just have a think about it and see where it leads you. So let's dive in. I'm going to break it down into three areas: food, exercise, and mindset, and the perfectionistic view versus how it could be procrastination. So, starting off with food, a really good example of this would be, let's say you have just realized you've got HA recovery, or perhaps you've known it for quite some time and you are ready to make some changes. And some of that change involves increasing your calories. And the questions you begin to ask yourself is, well, how do I increase them? What kind of foods should I be eating that make it worthwhile? Because if I'm going to increase my calories, I've got to make it count, which as a whole is a good thing. For the most part, we actually want to be making sure we're utilizing whole foods and having really good nutrition so our body is nourished, versus kind of mindlessly choosing foods and not feeling that great about them later on. So when you begin to go down this path, you might start going through Facebook groups and reading different posts from women who have recovered their period, or Instagram posts, or listening to all different kinds of podcasts on how women got their period back. And the more you dive down this rabbit hole, you start to realize that some women started eating potatoes at every meal. Some women perhaps were having a slice of cake every day. Some women stayed somewhat low carb. Some women need to really, really ramp up their carbs. Some women stayed vegan, or perhaps someone went from vegan to carnivore. you'll start to notice all these differences in women's recovery stories. And then it plants the seed of, how do I make the perfect choice? If I'm vegetarian, do I start eating meat? If I do that, is it going to get my period back faster? Or perhaps, no, I'm vegetarian, I want to stay vegetarian, but does that mean I can't recover because perhaps I'm the person who needs to do this and not the person who needs to stay vegan? Or you could be going, well, I don't want to eat processed foods at this point in time. So if I'm not doing that, does that mean that I can't recover? Because this woman said as soon as she added in some processed sugars that her period come back within 30 days. And as you can see, the whirlwind of thoughts really starts to ramp up. And it's very easy for us to get stuck in this whirlwind where we go from this, okay, I'm going to increase calories, let's do it, to, oh my gosh, there's so many ways I can get this wrong. And now I'm freaking out and I don't want to do it. Right? And it's easy to put that whole whirlwind of thought under an umbrella of perfectionism because I just want the perfect diet. I just want the perfect meals. I just want to work out what is perfect for me. Now, with that mindset comes procrastination because unless I know exactly what to do, I'm not going to do it. But the reality is, the most beautiful thing about HA recovery is how much you learn about your body and what it needs. So it's not uncommon for me to hear stories where women go, I've decided to add in red meat and I haven't eaten red meat in years. And then all of a sudden they'll have a dish with some red meat in it and they thoroughly enjoy it. And then a week later, they're craving something like a meat pie that they haven't had in 15 years. And then they eat the meat pie and they feel incredible, right? Or I might have another woman come to me and go, for the first time, I had a sandwich and I haven't had bread in the longest time. But for whatever reason, I decided to have a sandwich with my partner or my girlfriend or whoever. And it was fantastic. Like, I cannot believe I haven't been having sandwiches for so long. But where the difference lies is rather than trying to pick out the perfect first meal, it really is just exploring. And that is where you move from procrastination to action. Because if you can move away from trying to pick the perfect meal or make the perfect choice, then you can move into any step forward is my perfect step forward. Because there can be a lot of variables and there can be a lot of room for improvements depending on where you're starting from. And the fact that there is so much scope for improvement can freak you out. So I would really like you to step away from or consider this thought of, rather than trying to have the perfect meal, what would make this meal 1% better? Not perfect, just 1% better. Could I add in a potato? Could I add in some rice? Could I double the amount of protein I'm having? Could I perhaps go for a coffee date with my mum and actually have a bite of the cake that she has with her coffee, right? They're not perfect steps, but they're steps forward. And the more you can take these steps forward, the more you're going to learn about your body, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what you like, what you don't like, until you get to the point where you will have a reframe on your nutrition that complements a body that's menstruating. Right? But you need to be taking the steps forward to investigate, to explore, and to experience before you can get there. And that's one of the trickiest parts about HA recovery is we kind of want to get to the end before we've explored. And the magic is in exploration. So I guess the moral of the story is, when you're looking at food, I hope you can see that often our desire to have a perfect meal can be a way of hiding away from progress. Because the reality is, any decision you make that's going to help increase your calories or add in a macronutrient that you're currently missing out on, your body's going to be so grateful for you. And as long as you're making that step forward, you are progressing and you are going in the direction that you want to. So hopefully I have articulated that well enough that you can see the difference between that perfectionism view and how it can also be procrastination. And if it is procrastination, how you can start to push away from that and move in the direction of success. The next one we're going to dive into is exercise. So for many women with HA, myself included, exercise, it makes us thrive. It feels like it's a part of our identity, it's a part of who we are. Life doesn't feel the same without it. And the idea that we need to change our exercise can feel really awful. It can feel like we're being punished. But then at the same token, for some who are completely exhausted by their exercise routines, they may be in a position where they're actually so sick of the exercise they're doing, but it's just terrifying, the idea of changing it. So depending on which side of the fence you sit on, or somewhere in the middle even, what I'm about to say will still be helpful. But I just want to articulate that different women perceive their exercise routines in different ways when it comes to their HA recovery. Some hate it and just want to break free but are terrified. Others love it so much and feel like it's a punishment that they need to actually reduce their training in order to get their period back. When we're looking at the perfectionism side of things, it is perhaps reviewing your exercise regime and comparing it to other women who have recovered. So that could come in the form of reading a post where someone was training 4 times a week, 3 weight sessions, 1 run, and that was enough for them to get their period back. And then all of a sudden reading another woman had to drop all strength training, all running, and just do walking and yoga. But then you read another woman who was still running 10Ks 3 times a week, and you just go, what the heck? What is going on here? And just to add in some more confusion, you're watching women compete at CrossFit who have just fallen pregnant. And you're like, what? You train all day long. And if you listen to the podcast long enough, you'll know I bring that up because that's what happened when I was going through HA recovery. I was watching the CrossFit Games and women prep for the CrossFit Games, and it was Cara Webb and I forget the other one's name, but they both fell pregnant. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? They are elite athletes training so much and they're shredded and they've fallen pregnant, and I'm reducing my exercise like crazy and my period still isn't here. Anyway, enough about my little experience. But it's really important to look at, once again, we're not going for the perfect exercise regime because the reality is there is no one size fits all, right? It would be so great if we could just come up with this one cookie cutter routine where we gave it to every single woman and they all got their period back doing that exact same exercise regime, but it's just not true. Once again, it comes down to you exploring change and recognizing what it is your body needs in order to recover. And the only way you can do that is if you step away from trying to find the perfect exercise routine to commit to and move into, I just need to start making some tweaks and reevaluate each week, right? And what that looks like is if your weight's training 6 days a week, you might drop it down to 5. If you're training for an hour and a half every day, you might train for an hour and 15. If you're running, you might start walking instead. If you, I don't know, swapping a strength session for a yoga session. Like, there's actually so many changes you can make with your training, and that can be reduction in intensity, reduction in speed, reduction in duration, amount of times per week. There's actually so many variables. And if you're listening to this going, oh my gosh, I don't know how to reduce my training, send me a DM on Instagram because I'm on there a lot more than anywhere else. And if you like, you can send over what training you're doing and I can give you some feedback on the first steps I'd take to reducing your training that doesn't feel scary. All right, so super minuscule changes, just so that you can build some confidence that you are capable of change and that the world's not going to end if you make this change. I actually want to shout out to one of my wonderful clients who has made some really big changes to her training, and that has resulted in her actually dropping her cardio by an hour and a half each week and focusing more on strength. And she has just smashed through so many fears that were weight gain, fluid retention, inflammation, and instead she's just really spread her wings and allowed herself to see what happens if she makes these changes, and none of what she thought was going to happen happened, right? And I couldn't be more proud of her for taking that on board and really just embodying the best thing for her at this point in time. So yeah, shout out to that lovely client. I'm not going to mention names, but she will know who she is, and I hope she's smiling and perhaps even doing a happy dance because she should be. I certainly am. But back to what I was talking about. Sorry for the little raven rant. With the exercise, it really is stepping into any change is wonderful change, so that you can see that what you're afraid of doesn't happen, right? Because it can feel really intense. And another example would even just be taking a rest day. Is perhaps your first experience of a rest day isn't actual rest where you're not doing anything, right? Because that would be the perfect rest day, right? It would be perhaps lying on the beach, sunbaking, reading a book, or perhaps sitting and watching Netflix, depending on, what HA suggestions people make. But your perfect rest day could actually be you going for a 5K walk, or perhaps you still going into the gym, but you do just a little bit of a row or a bike ride and half the amount of sets you'd normally do, or you do a low volume session, or you do a lighter weight, high repetition session, right? So it's technically not a perfect rest day, but it's a lot more restful than what it would be any other day of the week. Yeah. So you can see how that shift from perfect actually leads you into progress, and how perhaps you perceiving what the perfect next step is actually stops you from progressing, which is your procrastination. Now, before we dive into mindset, which is the third element of this conversation, I just wanted to call out and say if you are enjoying the podcast and think it is worthy of a 5-star review, please do leave a 5-star review, because it's going to help with the outreach of the podcast. My goals for this year is very much growing the podcast and reaching more women like yourself, and I really can't do it without you. So if you do have a spare second, that would be absolutely amazing. But let's dive back into it. So, mindset, perfectionism versus procrastination. When we're looking at mindset pieces, there is so many moving parts that we can look at, right? We can be doing an audit on the thoughts that are popping up throughout the day and how to reframe them. We could be looking at stress regulation and perhaps adding in journaling or meditation. And then we could be looking at going back in time, perhaps where we've created these certain identities or rules or guidelines on things that we learned as a child that perhaps aren't as accurate when we look at them as an adult. To keep things simple, I'm going to steer more on the meditation, journaling, and reviewing thought side of things, rather than looking back at formulations of thoughts and identities and rules, because that's a bit of a more dense conversation, let's say. But a good example of this is when we see perhaps women on Instagram doing their journaling, and you might see this beautiful leather journal, they've got their candle, there's incense, perhaps there's dim lighting, and it's this real zen environment. And then we go, oh, okay, so if I'm going to journal and I've got to get all this stuff out of my head, I've really got to make sure that I've got everything perfect, because unless I'm calm, I'm relaxed, the lighting's right, I'm not going to be able to get it out of my head. Now, the reality is, any of you who've started journaling or perhaps thinking about doing it, the hardest part about journaling is actually letting the thoughts escape you, right? And it's a very easy to blame not being able to let the thoughts out on not having the perfect environment. Because if you had the perfect environment, you'd be so relaxed that the thoughts would just fly through, and you'd explore everything and have all the answers and the epiphanies. But the reality is, a lot of the time women experience blocks with journaling just because they haven't practiced asking themselves good questions, right? But instead of knowing that, we blame it on not having a perfect environment, which then falls back into our procrastination. Because if I can't have this perfect environment, there's no point doing it, because I won't be able to do it. And if I can't do it, what's the point? I now even feel more crap about myself because I couldn't do it. So what we want to be aiming for with something like journaling is not going, I need a perfect environment, but instead going, perhaps I just need to allocate 5 minutes or 3 minutes, because sometimes we feel this pressure to write essays whenever we journal, when we really don't need to. Sometimes you could get some really wonderful awareness about where you're at right now from one paragraph or even just one sentence. It doesn't have to be grand all the time, because the reality is, if you have the epiphany, if you have the insight, that is what's grand, and however it shows up is how it shows up. rather than have the perfect outcome, we just want to be looking at, once again, introducing the behavior. So rather than procrastinating and hiding behind the Zen room for your journaling, instead, we just want to go, I just need to write for 1 minute today. I just need to write 5 words. I just need to put on my favorite song and see whatever pops up while I'm thinking about my favorite song, right? And once you start to build that, you'll start to see that you're capable of journaling, that you're actually capable of getting thoughts out of your mind. But it could take quite a few practices. It could take a few weeks before you actually get the hang of it. And again, that's why we want to be looking for progress and not a perfect outcome, because what you perceive as a perfect journal, it doesn't really mean anything, because as long as you're getting the insight, it doesn't matter in what shape or form it comes up in. It's just about getting the insight or unlocking what you need to in order to get the insight. And again, that's going to come with exploration. It's going to come with curiosity. It's not going to be because you had the perfect setting. A similar thing applies for meditation, and I'm completely guilty of this, so I'm with you on this one, which is we have this idea that we want to meditate all the time. It's going to be so beneficial for me. I just need 1 or 2 minutes. But then our mind feels so busy leading up to the meditation practice that we go, oh my gosh, there's no way I can possibly calm down and enjoy this meditation for 2 minutes, so I'll just wait till later because my day will calm down, my mind will calm down, I'll get less busy, and then it'll be okay. But the reality is, the meditation is there to help calm your mind, to help bring you back to base, to help the world slow down. So the idea that you're delaying it until everything slows down goes completely against why we use it. So can you see how that idea of having a perfect meditation actually holds us back from participating in it, which essentially is going to bring us some success in regards to our stress management and anxiety regulation? So again, with this one, the procrastination comes in the form of, it's not going to be a good meditation, so what's the point? But any meditation practice still gets you in the right direction, because you're rehearsing how to bring yourself back to calm. You're allocating time for yourself, which something that tends to fall hand in hand with women with HA is that we give out everything to everybody else, and we don't allocate some time just for some quiet for ourselves because we're too busy attending to everything else. So taking the pressure off again for that meditation, and instead going, I don't need perfect, I just need to do it. And once I've done it, I can move on with everything else, right? Meditation, it can be tricky at the start once again, and it can take practice to actually enjoy it. There is other methods of meditation you can do that can make it more enjoyable, and I'll quickly rattle them off because you might find it helpful. One of them is listening to like rain sounds or forest sounds on YouTube. And what you do is you just close your eyes, sit in a meditative position, and you try and dial into all of the unique individual sounds in the track and see how much you can actually hear when you tune in. And because you're listening so intensely, I should say, it kind of clears your mind because you can't think about work, life, everything while you're tuning in so intensely to this particular sound or multiple sounds. Another form of meditation you can do is you need to have the candle a distance away from you, so it obviously doesn't strain your eyes, but watching the flame of the candle wave around and just really zoning into the movement and how it sort of dances. And third and final meditation that can be really helpful is just sitting there and trying to observe anything that your physical body does. So do you start to feel an itch on your knee? Do you start to feel or notice your heartbeat more? Do you start to feel your scalp tingle? And just observing those sensations. If you're not a fan of meditation, I highly recommend giving any of those 3 a try, because you might find it's a really good entrance into a meditative practice. And it can be 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, it really doesn't matter. As I said, anything is a step forward. So I'm going to wrap things up there because I feel like I've been talking quite a little bit about this perfectionism versus procrastination. Thanks so much for listening in. I hope you found today's episode helpful, or at the very least, it's given you something to have a think about. HA and ED recovery can be a bit of a puzzle, but it is a puzzle that absolutely can be solved, and I believe in you. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you in the next podcast episode. Bye for now.